So today, we're diving into a conflict that seems to be caught in this really dangerous, self-perpetuating loop. A place where, right now, the violence is just escalating dramatically. We are, of course, talking about Balochistan.
And this is the number that really tells the story. Just in the first part of 2024, fatalities from the conflict in Balochistan shot up by a staggering 80% compared to the year before. Now, that's not just a statistic, right? That is a massive red flag that something has drastically changed. So the big question is, why? Why is this all happening now?
And to put that 80% surge into perspective, just look at the raw number of attacks. In 2023, you had 612. In 2024, that number leaped to 938. To really understand a jump like that, we've got to look at both sides of this equation, the insurgency and the state's response.
So, our first stop is to really get a handle on the nature of this intensification. What's actually changed on the ground to cause such a huge spike in violence?
First, let's look at the actors in the insurgency. A huge driver of this surge is, the insurgent groups themselves. They've become way more sophisticated and, frankly, way more ambitious in what they're trying to do.
I mean, just take Operation Hero of Frof, which means Black Storm. In August 2024, the Baloch Liberation Army, the BLA, launched this massive coordinated wave of attacks all across the region. For almost a full day, they were directly challenging the state's control. We're not talking about a small ambush here. This was a province-wide show of force.
And yeah, the numbers absolutely back this up. In 2024, the BLA was, without a doubt, the most active group. They were responsible for over 300 attacks and more than 580 deaths. But the really crucial detail here is their use of the Majid Brigade. This is their elite unit, and it specializes in these high-impact suicide missions. That tells you a lot about the level of commitment and radicalization happening inside their ranks.
But look, a powerful insurgency, that's only half the story. To really get the full picture, to understand this cycle, we have to flip the coin and look at the other side, the state's response. And not just to violence, but to peaceful political protest.
And this brings us to the Raji Meshi, or the National Gathering. This quote from one of the organizers, Dr. Mering Baloch, it really captures what it was all about. She calls it a peaceful movement for justice, for economic rights, for fishermen, for farmers, for all the people who have disappeared. It was explicitly designed to be a non-violent way to air grievances.
But just look at how the state responded. The gathering is announced, and bam, highways are blocked with containers. Then security forces actually open fire on unarmed convoys of people trying to get there. Then the internet gets shut down. Then more protesters are shot and killed. What started as a plan for a peaceful rally just spiraled into this region-wide crackdown with arrests, injuries, and deaths.
So what was the official reason for this? Well, the government's justification was pretty clear. They flat out labeled the organizers as proxies for terrorists, calling them a criminal mafia that was bankrolled by foreign enemies. This is it's a completely different reality from the one the protesters were describing.
Okay, so now we have these two parallel stories, right? A rising insurgency on one hand, and this harsh crackdown on peaceful dissent on the other. The whole argument from our source material is that these two stories, they're not separate at all. In fact, they are deeply and dangerously connected.
And this is really the absolute core question of this entire explainer. How does firing on unarmed protesters in Gwadar lead to more people signing up for an armed group like the BLA? Let's break down that logic.
So here you can see the two competing narratives, just laid out side by side. The state says, oh, it's foreign funding, it's a few rogue tribal chiefs. But the analysis from people on the ground suggests that by systematically shutting down peaceful ways to protest, the state itself is becoming a main driver of radicalization. When talking is met with force, it can make violence seem like the only option left on the table.
And this quote, wow, it just captures that sense of desperation perfectly. The feeling is, hey, if we can get killed for just peacefully marching, we might as well die fighting. That logic, born from this feeling of having no other way out, is what our sources say is an incredibly powerful recruitment tool for these armed groups.
This brings us to one of the most, frankly, surprising parts of this whole story. Who exactly is getting recruited? Because the answer really challenges the typical stereotypes you might have about insurgents.
The official government line often paints militants as just a handful of individuals, uneducated, easily manipulated criminals.
But when you look at the profiles of recent militants who've either been killed or captured, it tells a very, very different story.
I mean, just look at this list of professions. This just shatters every stereotype. We're not talking about a handful of criminals. We're seeing poets, novelists, university graduates, journalists, even an MPhil student and a law student showing up in the ranks of the BLA's most elite units. These are educated, professional people who, for whatever reason, decided that armed struggle was their only path forward.
Okay, so let's tie all of these different threads together now. What we're actually witnessing here isn't just a bunch of random events. It's a clear, repeating pattern. It's a vicious cycle. Okay, so let's just trace the steps. It all starts with real political and economic grievances. People then try to address them through peaceful protests. The state responds to that with force, which effectively slams that door shut. This makes peaceful dissent look pointless, which then gives legitimacy to armed groups who start getting new recruits. The insurgency then gets stronger, it gets more violent, which provokes an even harsher state crackdown, and you see where this is going. The cycle begins all over again, each time with more and more intensity.
And all of this leaves us with this one final critical question. The sources we've looked at suggest that the conflict in Balochistan isn't just about fighting militants. It's about the space for political expression. And when that space keeps shrinking, when peaceful voices are consistently and violently silenced, it creates a vacuum. And that vacuum is inevitably filled by the sound of guns.